consciousness returned to Lyra Vale like a tide creeping up a frozen shore. Warmth reached her first, gentle, rich warmth that wrapped her in comfort she didn't recognize. Then came the scent, pine smoke, lavender oil, and something wild beneath it all. Her lashes fluttered open to gilded light spilling through high windows, painting patterns across unfamiliar stone walls. This wasn't the servants' quarters. It wasn't even anywhere a servant like her should be. Lyra sat up too quickly, and the room spun. Her limbs trembled, muscles stiff from exhaustion. The last thing she remembered was trudging through the snow after her shift in the laundry halls, trying to make it back to her tiny corner beneath the stairwell before the storm broke. She'd fallen, she remembered that much, the ice, the pain, the darkness swallowing her whole. But now, she was here. In a bed softer than clouds, draped in silks that shimmered pale blue against her white skin and silver hair. The kind of luxury that belonged to nobles, never to omegas like her. Before she could piece her thoughts together, the heavy door creaked open. A woman entered, tall and graceful, wearing the crest of the royal household. "Moon above," the woman gasped. "You're awake!" Lyra blinked, her voice rough. "Where am I?" "You're in the royal wing, my lady," the woman said gently. "The Alpha King himself brought you here after finding you collapsed near the southern gate." Lyra froze. "The Alpha King? That can't be right," she whispered. "I'm just an Omega worker. I don't even belong to a pack anymore. Why would the king?" But the woman only smiled in that strange, nervous way people did when they knew more than they were allowed to say. "His Majesty ordered that you be tended to personally," she said. "He's checked on you every day since." The words struck her harder than the cold ever had. The Alpha King? Checking on her? It made no sense. Omegas like her, especially ones like her, pale and marked by what others called a curse, didn't draw royal attention. They were invisible. Tools for labor, forgotten by dawn. And yet, here she was, in his palace, under his protection. A chill ran through her, not from cold this time, but from something deeper, something that hummed beneath her skin like a whisper she couldn't quite hear. Steam curled from the copper tub as attendants fussed with vials of herb oil and stacks of toweling. Lyra kept a death grip on the blanket knotted around her ribs. Omegas weren't bathed in rosewater and wrapped in silk. They scrubbed floors with it, and wrung the cloth dry in the yard wind. "I can manage," she murmured, but her legs gave a warning tremor. The senior attendant, gray plate, steady eyes, offered her forearm the way one wolf offers another, balance rather than pity. Lyra accepted because dignity without strength is only performance, and she had never been much of an actress. Warmth closed over her like a promise. She stared at the pale scars on her forearms, the ash-blonde hair at her temples, the winter-pale lashes that made strangers do a double take. Albino, they used to spit, as if the word were a spell to bind her to smallness. In the water's mirror she looked like fog that learned to breathe. "You'll want food, my lady," the gray-plated woman said when Lyra was swaddled in a robe soft as dusk. "And courage." "For what?" Lyra asked, though the hum under her sternum had already guessed. "For an audience." The door opened before she could protest, and the air changed. Not colder, but clearer, like the sky after a storm rips the smoke from it. The Alpha entered with two shadows at his flanks, a tall woman in healer's white and a broad-shouldered captain whose gaze measured threats the way a smith measures steel. The king moved like he had all the time in the world and none to waste. Dark hair, wind-chapped mouth, eyes the color of hewn basalt after rain. The Alpha in him pressed on the room, a tide tugging every Omega instinct to kneel, yet his focus gentled when it settled on her. "Lyra Vale," he said, voice low and rough-edged, as if he'd been using it on winter and war. "I am Kael Draven, Alpha King of the North. You were found near the southern gate during the whiteout. I brought you in." "I remember ice," she said. "And a stairwell. I worked the laundry, worked. I don't understand why I'm here." The healer dipped her head. "I am Sarah. Your temperature fell dangerously. You were close to slipping beyond our reach." Her eyes softened. The king stayed until your breathing steadied. Lyra's pulse tripped. Majesty, I'm grateful, but there must be some mistake. I'm a servant. I don't hold a pack name. I'm Omega, Kael finished. So am I, when duty sleeps. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth at her startled look. Rank is a cloak, not a spine. Sit, Lyra. If you stand any longer, Sarah will force you. She sat before her knees betrayed her. The king took the chair opposite, deliberate distance and open hands. His scent, cedar, cold iron, the edge of snow, cut through the rose and lavender until everything in her chest aligned toward it with embarrassing precision. There it was again, that inner thrumming thread, not pain, not fear, recognition. I'll not lie to you, Kael said softly. When I lifted you from the drift, something old lit in my ribs and answered back when I breathed your scent. The mate bond snapped tight. His jaw worked once. It was absolute. The word leapt across the space and landed in her lap like a live coal. Lyra stared at her hands, at the pale veins glowing like frost lines. The world shivered into a before and after she hadn't consented to. I didn't feel. She stopped, swallowed. Because now that he named it, the warmth in her sternum unfurled like a wolf rising from sleep. There was a pull toward him that wasn't subservience, wasn't fear. It was a rightness that terrified her precisely because it did not ask her mind for permission. You were half gone, Sarah murmured. The body can't host thunder while drowning. Lyra forced breath through tight lungs. And what did you do with this thunder, Majesty? Kael's gaze didn't flinch. I did what a winter Alpha King does when fate hands him something the world will try to steal. I secured it. I ordered you moved to the royal wing. I set guards outside your door to keep out gossip and greed. And I told my council only this, that a woman rescued in the storm is under my protection until spring. Only that? The question slipped out quick, sharp. No proclamations? No banners? A shadow crossed his mouth. Not yet. A beat. I will not write your life without your hand on the quill. The captain's gauntlet creaked as if in relief. Sarah's shoulders eased. Lyra's knotted muscles loosened the smallest breath. Eat, Kael said, rising. Rest. Walk the gardens with Sarah when sun returns. When you wish to speak again, send for me. He paused at the threshold and, without turning, added quietly. You are not invisible here, Lyra Vale. Not to me. The door closed. The thread in her chest hummed like a plucked wire long after his footsteps faded, and the echo it left behind felt dangerously like hope. Snow sifted all morning, soft as ash. Sarah shepherded Lyra through a wardrobe of simple wool dresses, the kind with quiet dignity rather than weaponized wealth, and out into a walled garden where black yew hedges held winter like a secret. Guard boots crunched somewhere discreetly distant. Breathe, Sarah said. Healing is work. Lyra tried. The air smelled of crushed juniper, iron benches, sleeping roses. Her breath fogged in pale ribbons that looked almost like her hair. Will they hate me? She asked finally, hating how small the words sounded in the open cold. The nobles. The packs. They don't like what I am. They never have. They will make noise, Sarah said dryly. Noise is not law. The healer's gaze sharpened. And what you are is Omega, which means you read rooms, feel tides, and keep a kingdom from tearing itself in the places it cannot see. The palace pretends alphas do all the holding. They do the shouting. Holding is quieter. A raven hopped along the top of the hedge, head cocked, glossy as ink. Lyra watched its feet puncture the snow and thought of the laundry courtyard, of steam ghosts rising from copper vats, of hands red from wringing winter out of cloth that would never touch her skin. She had built an entire life around not being looked at. Now the king had turned his face, and with it, the citadels, directly toward her. Why me? She whispered. There are hundreds of Omegas. Thousands. Why this wolf with frost-white lashes and everyone's worst superstition printed in her skin? Sarah considered the bare rose canes. The goddess is not a bureaucrat. She does not allocate bonds by committee. Her mouth tipped wry. And the Alpha King has turned down every alliance the Council has tried to stitch him into for 6 winters running. He is not a man to be harnessed by convenience. Lyra frowned. You make him sound lonely. He carries a country on his shoulders and keeps a border that bites, Sarah said. Lonely is cheaper than careless. Then, gentler. You do not have to decide anything today. You may never choose him. Bonds call, they do not coerce. But until you know your own answer, let his guard carry the danger that would otherwise look for you in alleys and kitchens. The hum in Lyra's chest answered like a tuning fork struck by distance. She closed her eyes and found it was easier to breathe when she didn't pretend it wasn't there. Footsteps approached. Different cadence, iron and leather, a steady hunt beat. Lyra opened her eyes as the captain from the night before halted with a bow meant for equals, not staff. Rowan Hale, he introduced, voice like gravel in a stream. Captain of the King's Shield. I am told I answered to Sarah in all matters of do not let her fall on the ice. The corner of his mouth twitched. I am also told you know how to vanish when you wish. Kindly do not. I'm not used to people noticing when I leave, Lyra said, surprised into honesty. Get used to it, Rowan replied. Then, softer. The court will gossip. That's their winter sport. The king will not permit harm. I am less poetic than the king, so I will simply say, if you need teeth between you and a problem, you have them. When he left, Sarah nudged Lyra down a path laced with frost. Eat, she ordered again, seating her on a bench and producing a paper-wrapped parcel like a conjurer. Inside, hand pies steaming with thyme and potato, sugared pears, a wedge of white cheese that tasted like snow-remembered spring. Lyra ate until color rose in her cheeks. When the ache in her stomach steadied, she realized another ache had sharpened, the pull toward the royal wing. Not a compulsion. A curiosity with gravity. He had called her by her name. He had not called her pretty. He had called her visible. She wiped sugar from her thumb and looked at Sarah. If I asked to see him again, I would say you are the patient, Sarah said, smiling, and prescribe exactly what eases the ribs. Kael's war room looked like a cartographer had dreamt of knives. Maps tattooed the table in inks brown as bark and blue as bruise. Markers shaped like wolves snarled over border lines where snowfields met iron mines and a river curled like a sleeping serpent. He stood with sleeves rolled to forearms that had learned their justice from winter. Lyra lingered in the doorway one breath too long. He looked up the way a starving man looks toward a kitchen he did not know he'd been allowed to enter. The sensation that raced along the mate bond was not a chain. It was sunlight striking hoarfrost, an ache of beauty almost violent. Lyra, he said, and her name in his mouth felt like a hearth found lit. I didn't want to interrupt. She gestured at the maps. You are permitted to interrupt me, he said simply, then added, always. He glanced at Rowan, who faded with 2 scouts and a door click that left the room quiet enough to hear her own heartbeat. This will be awkward, Lyra said, choosing the blade that could cut them both free of ceremony. I have questions. Many. Some of them impertinent. Good, Kael said, relief like a weather change. Ask. Why me? She heard the echo of her garden question but drove deeper. Not the goddess poetry. You. Kael Draven. Alpha King and man. Why did you pick me up from snow and decide the safest place for me was the center of a target? Because the center of a target is also the center of my reach, he said. Because the further from me you are, the more hands will try their luck at stealing what they think I want. He looked down at the map and traced a line with one blunt finger. And because when I carried you, my wolf went still for the first time since my father died. Quiet in a way that did not feel like loss. That quiet said home? Her throat worked. She made herself keep pace. Did you tell the council? I told them nothing they could weaponize, he said. They smell leverage like hounds on blood. I will not hang your name on their wall. A pause. When and if you choose me, you will choose the kingdom too. I will not rush either ceremony. Lyra exhaled. And if I never choose? If this hum stays a hum and not a trumpet, then winter will end, and you will leave with coin, a patronage contract, and my guard on your road, Kael said without flourish. A king can keep a promise without keeping a mate. The honesty unstrung something behind her ribs so abruptly she had to put a palm to the table. He moved, then stopped himself, as if the urge to reach had to learn a new language for permission. I haven't been anyone's first choice, Lyra said, open on the anvil now. Not as a worker, not as a guest, certainly not as a wolf. I learned to live in the edges because the center burned. You're asking me to stand in the center and trust it won't. I'm asking you to stand where you like, he said, and there was a stubborn gentleness in it. If that is the edge, then I will build a road to it and walk there. Silence gathered, bright rather than heavy. She found herself smiling, small, incredulous. You talk like a lighthouse, Kael. I am a king who spends too much time with rivers and not enough with people, he admitted. I am learning. She circled the table and pointed at the Serpent River. What does this bend mean? Floodplain, he said, grateful to climb into the work that did not bruise. When thaw comes, villages here will need timber levees. The council would prefer to fund a marble foyer. You see my problem. Lyra leaned in. She saw many problems, and solutions no marble could buy. She asked about trade roads, about winter grain stores, about the way the packs negotiated salt and iron across borders. He answered in clean lines and weather facts. Somewhere between questions, the hum between them settled into something steady as breath. Not a demand. A presence. When she left, Rowan's eyebrow asked a question. Kael ignored it, but his mouth had found a shape it wore rarely. The scouts would call it a smile and dare each other not to notice. The maps noticed. The court noticed, too. By the end of the week, Lyra's walks in the garden were accompanied not only by quiet guards, but by drifting clusters of silk and speculation. The noble's curiosity came perfumed and barbed. Lady Vesper. Silver gowns, obsidian voice, offered a bow that wavered just shy of respect. We are all so relieved you recovered, mistress. Vale, was it? The king's mercy is a snow-fed river. Lyra smiled the way laundry steam does, softly, while it burns. His mercy saved my life. Your words can save their warmth for someone cold. Vesper's eyes cooled another degree. You have a spine for a laundress. I had to find one, Lyra said gently. People kept trying to hang their coats on me. A muffled snort from Rowan behind her tasted like victory. But politics is a long winter, not a good snowball. The next day, Lyra found her work alcove beneath the stair gutted, her blanket rolled, her tin cup gone, the little pressed flower book she'd hidden under a loose board missing entirely. Someone was making sure she understood what leaving invisibility costs. She didn't cry. She took the sting to Sarah, who plucked a splinter from Lyra's palm and hummed like thunder about to comment on fools. Then she took it to Kael, not as accusation, but as ledger. They are testing boundaries, Lyra said, setting the empty tin cup on the war table like evidence. I would prefer not to lose anything else. Kael's fingers flexed. Name what you need. A door that locks, she said. Not to keep me in. To keep small men out. You'll have it by evening, he said. And the little book? Lyra's mouth twisted. Pressed flowers. From the laundry yard. Petty to care for when there are levies to fund, but it was mine. Rowan's jaw hardened. I'll have it back by supper. By supper, Kael agreed, voice cooling to a king's temperature. Then to Lyra, warmer. You are entitled to care about small things. That is how a country remembers how to be human. That evening, her new door clicked with a satisfying authority, and her pressed flower book lay on her pillow with an apology scrawled in a hand she didn't recognize. We thought you'd moved on. Didn't think you'd miss junk. Sarah burned the note. Lyra kept the ash. Not all encounters cut. In the kitchens, a cook with arms like bread loaves slid an extra honey roll into Lyra's hand. For the road to wherever you choose, she said. We don't often see the king look like a wolf who has found fresh tracks. And in the training yard, Rowan held a wooden knife out to her. "A favor to me," he said when she hesitated. "Learn to put your feet where trouble can't find them." "I am an Omega," she reminded. "And I am not teaching you to win," he countered. "I am teaching you to leave upright." She learned how to pivot on ice, how to spot a lie by its breath, how to step into a room at an angle that gave her 3 exits and no apologies. When she stumbled, he grunted, and when she bled, he smiled in that bleak, proud way soldiers save for those who choose not to be prey. At night, when the palace went blue and quiet, Lyra read in the royal library treaties, old letters between queens and quartermasters, herbals annotated by healers who loved the leaf more than prestige. She learned the country the way a weaver learns her loom, by touch, by thread count, by the music of tension and release. And always, under everything, the maid bond hummed like a hearth she could turn her back to without fearing it would die. The first real storm of late winter came at dusk, full of needles. Couriers staggered in with faces flayed raw by wind. A shepherd arrived carrying a lamb that had forgotten warmth. Kael's council howled for postponements and priority lists and permission to panic. The king dismissed them with a hand and sent for Lyra and Sarah instead. On the table, the Serpent River wore a crown of ice. Kael had marked 3 villages with black stones. "If the shelf breaks tonight," he said, "the flood will take the low barns. If the barns go, the spring lambing goes, and then hunger," Lyra finished, mouth already moving in the arithmetic of care. "Sarah, how many dry blankets can the infirmary spare?" "Rowan, how quickly can you put men with axes at the upstream jam? We need channels cut before midnight to bleed the force." Rowan's nod was already halfway to the door. 50 axes within the hour." Lyra traced the ridges on the map with 2 fingers. The bond in her chest tugged, not to Kael, but to usefulness. "The women in Halmir weave river ropes," she said. "They knot fast as prayer. Send for 10 coils. If we lose a man to the current, we won't lose 2. Kael's gaze burned, not with alpha heat, but with recognition. "Do it." They did it. Under knife-cold sky and lantern smoke, they did it. Lyra moved with Sarah from barn to barn, organizing straw on stone floors, setting kettles to boil, taking babies she never met into her arms because their mother's hands shook and someone had to lay the first warm skin on fear. She tore her skirt to bind a cut, and used her body as a windbreak for a shivering dog whose boy refused to leave him. She learned the names of people who had never had reason to speak to a palace, and wrote them where she writes everything she wants never to lose, in the thin places under her ribs. Near midnight the river roared its surrender, choosing channels the axes had offered. The eyes split not in rage but in relief. When it was done, when the last boy and his dog were tucked beneath drying wool and the last kettle went quiet, Lyra stepped out into the yard and leaned her head against the cold wall to keep from shaking out the feelings all at once. Bootsteps. She didn't need to turn to know whose. The bond told her, the way a hearth tells you which house is yours by the smoke. "You saved them," Kael said, voice scraped down to truth. "We saved them," she corrected. "I just remembered what it's like to be small and cold and asked the night what would help quickest." He stood beside her, not touching. "The council will turn this into a speech." "Let them," she murmured. "Just don't let them take the rope money." His laugh was a tired, cracked thing that still warmed her. Snow needled their hair. The lamps swayed on their chains. Lyra felt the pull like a tide and decided to meet it halfway. She reached, found his hand, and set her palm in it the way a wolf sets her paw on fresh prints, testing, claiming, asking. Kael's breath hitched. His fingers closed, careful around her knuckles as if they were prophecy. The mate bond flared, bright, clean, no burn. Not possession. Recognition. "When spring comes," she said softly, "I want to see the river green." "When spring comes," he answered, "I want to see you choose whatever makes your ribs feel like this night felt at the moment the ice broke." They stood until the lamps went still. When they parted, there was frost in her hair and a steadiness in her bones that had not been there when dusk fell. Somewhere behind them, in a palace that had learned a new kind of quiet, the maps waited. So did the nobles, the doors, the knives, the songs. The winter would keep testing. That was winter's job. Lyra Vale had found hers. Morning came silver and exhausted. The sky hung low, bruised from the storm's temper, and every tree branch glimmered with ice that hadn't decided yet whether to melt or endure. Lyra stood at her window, cup of bitter tea cooling between her palms, and watched the courtyard below come alive again. Stable hands led the rescued horses toward the paddocks. Children darted through the snow chasing a half-frozen ball of wool that used to be a dog. The palace had a heartbeat again. Her chest ached pleasantly with it, though she told herself it was only fatigue. The bond's hum had grown quiet but constant, like the sound of a river beneath ice. Kael had been right, it wasn't a chain. It was a current. She could step in or not. The river didn't force her, it waited. When the knock came, she didn't startle. Rowan entered with the subtle dignity of someone who preferred walls to gossip. "The king asked me to check you hadn't fallen asleep standing up. He's been preoccupied with reports. He could have asked me himself." Rowan's mouth twitched. "He could have, yes. But the council's patience is shorter than his temper, and I think he's sparing them both." He dropped a small bundle wrapped in wax cloth onto her table. "You left this by the riverbank last night." Lyra unwrapped it carefully, the pressed flower book, its spine damp but intact. "You found it." "I find things," he said. "Including wolves who think gratitude makes them weak." "I'm learning," Lyra replied softly. "Good," Rowan said, turning to go. "Because the court will test you again before noon." They did. By midday, the throne hall thrummed with the sound of too many voices, nobles clustered like flocks of jeweled birds. Lyra had been summoned, not by Kael but by the High Council itself. "A formal inquiry," they'd said, "to clarify her position." Sarah had pressed a hand to Lyra's arm before she entered. "Speak truth. The king's law is written on stone, but hearts are moved by sound." Inside, the chamber smelled of wax, steel, and judgment. Kael stood beside the throne but not upon it. A message, Lyra realized, that even he would listen before he ruled. The council elder, a hawk-faced woman named Elaine, raised her chin. "Lyra Vale," she began, voice clipped. "You were found by His Majesty during an unauthorized excursion beyond the gates. Since that day, you have resided in royal quarters, received instruction from palace tutors, and accompanied His Majesty in matters of state. The court wishes to know on what authority you hold such privileges." "His Majesty's orders," Lyra said simply. Elaine's mouth thinned. "And on what grounds?" Lyra hesitated, then drew in a steadying breath. "On the grounds that he saved my life." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Gratitude does not grant station. There are protocols, Miss Vale, which—" Kael's voice cut through, low but unmistakable. "Enough." The word froze the air. He stepped forward, gaze sweeping the assembly. "The matter of Miss Vale's residence is mine alone. She remains under my protection by decree of the Alpha throne." Elaine inclined her head but did not retreat. "Protection, Your Majesty, or preference?" A dangerous silence followed. Lyra felt every eye flick toward her, some pitying, most predatory. The easiest thing would have been to lower her head, to let Kael fight the storm for her. But she had walked through enough storms to know when one belonged to her. "Preference?" she said quietly. "No, Lady Elaine. Mercy." Elaine blinked. "Mercy?" Lyra took a step forward. "Because I was no one before this winter. I slept under stairs, ate what others left behind, and still called myself lucky. The king showed me mercy, nothing more. And if mercy is what offends this court, then perhaps the problem is not mine to answer." For a moment, there was only the crackle of torches and the soft rasp of Kael's breath beside her. Then, slowly, the king's mouth curved, not a smile, but the ghost of one. "Well said," he murmured, and the council, for once, fell silent. Later, in the quiet of the library, Kael found her tracing patterns across a map of the northern range. "You didn't need to defend yourself," he said softly. "I wasn't defending myself," she replied. "I was defending what you built." He studied her for a long moment. "You're learning to speak like a queen." "I'm learning to speak like someone who's tired of being small," Lyra said. Kael's hand brushed the edge of the map near hers, not touching but close enough that the air thickened. "When you're ready," he said quietly, "I will call the moon as witness and name you my Luna. But only when you tell me to." Lyra looked up at him, her silver eyes reflecting torchlight like polished frost. "Then perhaps," she said, "you should keep the moon waiting a little longer. She's waited centuries for you. She can wait a few more nights for me." Kael's laugh was soft, reverent. "As my Luna commands." Outside, the first fragile buds pushed through the snow along the garden walls. Winter, like power, was beginning to thaw. And so was she. Spring crept over the northern territories with hesitant fingers. The icicles thinned, the air lost its bite, and the river Lyra had helped save whispered its thawing song through the valley. The world was changing, and so, it seemed, was she. Her lessons grew longer. In the mornings, Sarah drilled her on pack customs and the history of royal bonds. In the afternoons, Rowan trained her in self-defense, how to move when cornered, how to fight without fury. At night, Kael taught her how to listen. "Power isn't shouting loudest," he said one evening in the council chamber. "It's knowing when silence will make them listen harder." Lyra absorbed every word, storing them alongside all she'd learned of herbs, treaties, and politics. The more she learned, the more she understood that being Luna was not just ceremony. It was protection, the quiet kind, the kind that steadied empires. And still, every time Kael entered a room, the air changed. The bond between them hummed faintly now, not like a storm but like a heartbeat she could match to her own. They didn't speak of it often, but it was there, in every glance, every pause too long to be purely polite. That was why the warning struck like thunder. Lyra had been reviewing trade documents in the library when Rowan appeared, jaw tight. "You're not to leave this room until I return," he said. Her pen froze mid-stroke. "What happened?" He hesitated, the pause speaking louder than any word. "The Western Court. Someone sent a message, poisoned seal wax. The king touched it." Her breath caught. "Is he?" "He's alive," Rowan said quickly. "The healers are with him. But whoever sent it wanted him dead." Lyra's chair scraped back as she stood. "Then I'm going to him." Rowan blocked the door with one arm. "His orders were clear. You stay here. Then revoke them," she snapped. "I'm not another servant to be hidden when danger comes." "Lyra!" "Move, Captain," she said, voice steady now. "I may not wear a crown yet, but I am bound to the one who does." For a moment they stood in tense silence, the air thick with the scent of iron and conviction. Then Rowan sighed and stepped aside. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "If regret keeps him breathing, I'll welcome it." The corridors leading to the royal wing were heavy with the smell of burnt sage and herbs. Healers moved briskly, voices hushed but urgent. Kael lay in his chambers, half reclined, his skin pale beneath the torchlight. Sarah was bent over him, her hands glowing faintly with energy as she drew out the poison. Lyra's heart clenched. "Kael." He turned his head toward her, managing a faint smile. "I told Rowan you'd ignore him." She knelt beside the bed, gripping his hand. "Who did this?" "We're still tracing the seal," Sarah said. "The poison was sophisticated, crafted for alphas. It burns through dominance energy first." Lyra looked down at Kael's hand, trembling slightly in hers. "Then I'll burn it slower," she whispered. "Share it with me." Sarah froze. "Lyra, don't." But she had already closed her eyes, focusing on the bond. It pulsed like light beneath her ribs. She reached for it, and willed it open, drawing the heat into herself. Pain licked her veins like wildfire, but she held tight, refusing to let go until the tremor in Kael's pulse steadied. When she finally collapsed back, breath shallow, Kael's color was returning. His eyes snapped open, shocked, angry, and terrified all at once. "Are you insane?" he demanded hoarsely. "You could have died?" Lyra whispered. "So could you." Their gazes locked, the air between them humming with raw energy. For a moment either spoke. Then Kael reached for her hand again, this time not to stop her, but to keep her close. "You shouldn't have done that," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have had to be saved," she replied. "Now we're even." Hours later, when the palace finally settled into uneasy quiet, Sarah stood outside their chamber door, arms folded. "You do realize," she murmured to Rowan, "that the council will hear of this by morning." Rowan's mouth twitched. "Let them. If the court feared her before, they'll start praying to her now." And somewhere inside, Lyra Vale, the once forgotten Omega who'd slept beneath the stairs, lay beside the Alpha King she'd nearly died to save, the bond between them glowing brighter than moonlight. She was beginning to understand that fate didn't crown you with ceremony. It whispered stand up, and waited to see if you would. The next morning dawned too still. Even the birds seemed to hesitate before daring to sing. The palace corridors, normally full of echoing footsteps and the rustle of robes, carried only whispers now. Word of the attempted assassination had spread like frost across glass, quiet, delicate, and deadly. Lyra woke with the faint ache of yesterday's fire still smoldering in her veins. The poison she'd drawn through the bond had faded to a dull throb, but the memory of it lingered. The way Kael's heartbeat had steadied beneath her palms, the heat that had tried to devour them both, the way their souls had found a rhythm in the chaos. When she turned, Kael was awake, watching her. His eyes were clear again, gray-gold under the morning light, but there was a new edge in them, something sharper than gratitude. "You shouldn't have taken that risk," he said quietly. Lyra met his gaze without flinching. "Then next time, don't get poisoned." He blinked, startled into the ghost of a smile. "You sound more like a queen every day." "I sound like someone who's tired of nearly losing people," she corrected. "There's a difference." He reached out, fingers brushing her wrist. "You took the bond further than I ever have. It could have killed you. But it didn't," she said softly. "It chose not to. Maybe the bond knows something we don't." Kael's expression darkened, thoughtful. "Or maybe it's warning us." By noon, the council demanded an emergency assembly. Kael, still recovering but refusing rest, took his place at the head of the long blackwood table. Lyra sat at his right, uninvited but not refused, and felt the weight of every stare pinning her in place. Elaine, her voice smooth as glass, began. "Your Majesty, this attack was not random. The seal on the poisoned letter belonged to the royal house of the Eastern Dominion." A ripple of shock passed through the room. Lyra's heart tightened. "But the Eastern Dominion signed a peace accord with you last winter." "They did," Kael said grimly. "And their envoy swore loyalty under moonlight." "Then they've broken the pact," one of the younger lords snapped. "We should send troops immediately." "War is what they want," Kael said, his voice steady but cold. "A war to weaken the North while they move for control." Elaine tilted her head. "And what would you suggest instead, Majesty? Sitting idle while they strike again?" Lyra leaned forward. "You catch wolves by following their tracks, not by burning the forest." Every gaze turned to her. She continued before fear could choke her voice. "This poison wasn't made by outsiders. It was crafted for an alpha's physiology. That means someone here helped them." Kael's head turned toward her slowly. "You think it was an inside hand?" "I know it," she said. "The seal might have come from the east, but the hands that delivered it belonged to someone close enough to touch you." A silence stretched so long it felt like the palace itself was holding its breath. "Then we'll find them," Kael said finally, voice dropping to something low and lethal. "And when we do, I'll decide whether mercy still exists in this kingdom." That night, Lyra found Rowan waiting outside her chambers. He looked as though he hadn't slept in a week. "You were right," he said. "The letter wasn't delivered through the outer gates. It came through the royal courier line. She frowned. Only the high houses have access to that. Exactly. Rowan's eyes flicked toward the corridor. And one of those couriers answered to someone in the palace before he vanished. Vanished? Found near the stables this morning, Rowan said grimly. Neck broken cleanly. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. Lyra's stomach dropped. So someone silenced him. Someone close enough to walk these halls without question. Lyra glanced down the candlelit hallway toward the king's chambers. Kael can't fight this alone. Rowan's jaw tightened. He won't. But if we're going to expose the traitor, we need to move quietly. Whoever did this has eyes everywhere. Lyra nodded slowly, resolve hardening inside her. Then we move in shadows, Captain. The same way I used to survive. For the first time since she met him, Rowan smiled without restraint. The palace has no idea what kind of wolf it's just cornered. That night, Lyra didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moon hang pale and distant over the snow-capped roofs. The hum of the mate bond pulsed faintly in her chest, but it wasn't peace she felt, it was purpose. Someone inside these walls had tried to kill her mate, her king. And whoever they were, they'd made one fatal mistake. They'd underestimated the albino Omega who no one was supposed to notice. The next few days passed in a blur of strategy and silence. The palace corridors seemed narrower now, their familiar stone walls holding secrets in their cracks. Everyone smiled too quickly. Every whisper felt like a warning. Lyra spent her mornings shadowing Sarah through the infirmary, listening more than speaking. Wolves talk when they think no one hears them, and servants see everything. By evening, she had gathered fragments of conversations, nothing complete, but enough to draw a picture. A noble name appeared again and again, Lord Varen, Kael's cousin. Once a commander, now a court favorite. He had the Eastern Dominion's blood through his mother's line, and his charm was the kind that hid sharpened teeth. Varen would never dare, Sarah whispered when Lyra shared her suspicions. He grew up beside Kael. Exactly, Lyra murmured. He knows the king's habits. He knows his seal. He knows how to reach him without question. That evening, Lyra approached Kael's war room. The doors stood half open, the lamplight inside flickering over his shoulders as he studied the same river map that had once connected them. Tell me it isn't Varen, he said before she even spoke. I can't, she said. I don't have proof, just trails. But they all lead to him. Kael's jaw tightened. He's blood. Then this will hurt, Lyra said softly. But better the truth than poison wearing your family's face. Kael looked at her for a long time, the bond between them thrumming with emotion too heavy to name. You've changed everything, he whispered. Not everything, she said. Just the parts that needed light. Night cloaked the palace in quiet, the kind that comes before storms. Rowan gathered a handful of trusted guards, wolves bound by oath, not politics, and led Lyra through the lesser-known corridors beneath the great hall. This way, he murmured. The royal post ledgers are kept here. Every letter that enters the palace passes through this vault. Lyra's lantern cast wavering gold on stone steps slick with condensation. The air smelled of iron and dust. At the bottom lay a heavy door engraved with the crest of the first Alpha King. Rowan pressed a seal against the lock. It clicked, then groaned open. Inside, parchment towers leaned like ancient trees. Lyra scanned the room, her pulse quickening. If Varen was behind it, there will be a record of his courier. They searched in silence. Minutes passed. Then, here. Rowan held up a parchment strip sealed in red wax. The stamp was broken, but faint traces of gold leaf still shimmered on its edge, Eastern Dominion style. Lyra leaned closer, reading the signature etched faintly at the bottom. Varen of the Northern Line. Her chest went cold. It's him. Before Rowan could respond, the torches flickered violently. Shadows shifted in the corners, and from them stepped men in dark armor bearing no royal insignia. Drop it, one barked. You shouldn't have come here. Rowan drew his blade in a blur. Go, he growled. Take the proof to Kael. I'm not leaving you, Lyra hissed. You're not staying. Before she could argue, Rowan slammed his shoulder into her, shoving her through a narrow side door. The last thing she saw before it closed was the flash of steel and the sound of her friend's battle cry echoing through the stone. She ran. The corridors twisted endlessly, each turn lit by sputtering torches. She clutched the parchment against her chest, praying Rowan would follow, but the silence that swallowed her said otherwise. When she finally burst into the open hall, 2 guards turned toward her in shock. My lady? Find the king, she gasped. Now. Kael met her halfway up the marble stairs, his cloak thrown hastily around his shoulders, eyes blazing. Lyra, what? She held out the torn parchment, breath shaking. It's Varen. He used the courier line. Rowan stayed behind to hold them off. Kael took the paper, scanning it with a grim expression that hardened into fury. Where? The archives. Beneath the hall. Kael turned to his guards. Seal the exits. No one leaves the lower wing without my order. Lyra grabbed his arm. Kael, Rowan's still down there. I'll find him. No, she said, stepping in front of him. You're still healing, and whoever's behind this wants you dead. Let me go. You think I'll send my Luna into danger while I hide? His voice cracked like a whip, but the fear behind it softened the blow. I think, she said steadily, that I know how to move unseen. And if this is to end tonight, I need to face it. The bond flared between them, hot and electric, as if the very air rebelled against the thought of them apart. Then Kael nodded once, slow and reluctant. Take the eastern passage. The guards will follow my scent, not yours. Be careful, Lyra. I'll do more than that, she said. I'll finish it. The lower halls were case. The sound of steel clashing echoed through the stone. Lyra slipped through smoke and dust, heart hammering, until she found the chamber where she'd left Rowan. He was alive, barely, his shoulder slashed, back pressed to a broken pillar. 3 of Varen's men lay motionless around him. He looked up when she entered, blood on his lips. You always ignore orders. You always get stabbed, she countered, crouching beside him. A voice interrupted them from the doorway. Touching, it drawled. But unnecessary. Varen stepped through the smoke, elegant as ever. His silver eyes gleamed with cold amusement. I wondered how long it would take before the king's new pet sniffed out the truth. Lyra rose slowly. You betrayed your own blood. I liberated him, Varen said. Kael's reign has been a long winter. The packs are starving, the Dominion offers spring. And all he needed to do was die quietly. You tried to poison him, she said. He smiled. And failed. But you've given me something better. The Council already sees you as his weakness. Lyra's pulse steadied. Then you've never met a true Omega. Before he could answer, she moved, fast, low, and precise, just as Rowan had taught her. Her blade flashed in the torchlight. He parried once, twice, but she wasn't fighting for dominance. She was fighting for home. When his sword grazed her shoulder, she stepped inside his guard, driving her dagger into the seam of his armor. His breath hitched, shock flashing across his face as he staggered back. You'll doom us all, he rasped. No, she whispered. I'll save him. Varen fell to his knees, eyes wide, and then collapsed. Lyra stood shaking in the silence, blood soaking her sleeve, the dagger clattering to the floor. Lyra! Kael's voice echoed from the corridor. He appeared seconds later, eyes dark with alarm. When he saw Varen's body, his expression broke. Grief, rage, relief all warring at once. You shouldn't have. He was coming for you, she said simply. I finished it. Kael looked at her for a long time before stepping forward, pulling her against him. You've done what even I couldn't. The kingdom owes you its breath. And what do you owe me? She whispered against his chest. He tipped her chin up, his gaze soft but unyielding. Everything. Spring came in full this time, bold and unapologetic. The rivers ran free, and the air filled with the scent of thawing pine. Varen's betrayal had been laid bare before the council. His followers were disbanded, his wealth distributed among the border packs he tried to ruin. The court that once whispered behind Lyra's back now bowed as she passed. Not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Kael's coronation of the Luna Queen took place beneath the full moon. The ceremony was ancient, words older than the mountains, vows spoken in the language of wolves. When Kael clasped her hand, the mate bond flared so bright she thought the stars themselves had drawn closer to listen. "My Luna," Kael murmured as he placed the silver circlet upon her head. "My equal. My forever." Lyra met his gaze, her heart steady. "And my king. My chosen." The court erupted in howls, some in joy, some in surrender, but all in recognition. The bond between them pulsed once, strong and radiant, binding not just their souls, but the realm itself. Later that night, when the palace had quieted and the moon hung high over the river they'd once saved, Lyra stood beside Kael on the balcony. "You've changed everything," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "No. The world was always waiting. I just stopped hiding from it." He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. "I searched 2 centuries for my mate, Lyra Vale. The goddess didn't just give me love, she gave me reason. And she gave me home," Lyra whispered. Below them, wolves howled to the moon, their voices weaving through the wind like music. The kingdom, long starved of hope, finally exhaled. Lyra closed her eyes and listened to the sound. The rogue Omega who had once slept beneath the stairs was gone. In her place stood the Luna Queen of the North, scarred, steady, and chosen by both fate and her own will. The bond between them glowed like dawn on snow. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the goddess smiled, because 2 souls that were never meant to meet had found each other anyway, and built something even the moon would envy.